Good morning, everybody. For those of you all who were here last year and came to the panel, thank you for coming back for round two. One of the things is when we did last year's panel, we got some very positive feedback and people were like, oh, well, let's try to re-engage and do it again this year. This is not going to be last year's panel. So we're going to build on what we started with in our discussion last year and really try to take things to the next level. And we've got two great panelists who are going to help us to start the conversation, but this will be something that we will be requiring audience participation. As JB pointed out, I used to be a professor in a business school, and so I believe in cold calling if necessary. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves because they can tell their story much better than I can. And so, Deb, I'm going to start with you. And then, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, Deb Cornish. I work for Cox Communications here in Rhode Island. I've been with Cox for 10 years. I'm the Regional Vice President of Human Resources. Prior to that, spent some time in banking and utilities. Went to school in Massachusetts, graduate school, undergrad, and I live in Massachusetts with my husband and 2 children and 3 Shih Tzus.
Great. Thank you.
So I get to mention my dog as well.
Oh,
right?
good.
Yes,
Yes,
you
you
do.
do.
Karen?
Sure. Karen Charles Peterson. I am the commissioner for the Massachusetts Department of Telecommunications and Cable. I've worked in state government for 10 years as well. I've been serving as commissioner, I guess, for about 4 years, but I've been at the department for 7 years. I started in 2011 as the department's chief of staff. Prior to joining the administration, I actually worked in television. I worked for WGBH in Boston. I was a booking producer for the news program Greater Boston with Emily Rooney, and I did that for 5 years, and that was fun and exciting. This topic is really important, and so I was so honored to be asked to serve on the panel this morning. So, David, thank you for the invitation. And I have and I always get the pronunciation wrong, incorrectly, Weinemeyer. Weinemeyer? Weine?
I'm not sure, but it's a hunting dog.
Hunting dog, exactly.
For the record, I travel way too much. I have no pets, no fish, no. Well, anyway, to get started, I'd like to really just kind of level set and talk about just your general ideas about what are the basic things that our companies need to be doing and are doing to provide for a more inclusive workforce, just so that everyone can be on the same page. And Deb, I'll start with you. Could you give me your perspectives, and Karen, you can add on.
Sure, and I'll take a minute, if you don't mind, to just make the distinction between diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. So I think for many years, everyone has been on board with, we want to be more diverse. We want our employee base to look like our customer base. And so, whether that is what you typically think about, age, gender, race, but it's more than that. It goes far deeper than that. It could be the neighborhood you grew up in, the education you have, and then when you add inclusion onto that, you're getting deeper along that spectrum of what kind of upbringing did you have. We talked this morning about, I grew up in Kansas, and the question was, what are companies doing? Well, what should they do? So, at Cox, diversity has been a value of our company since Governor Cox's first newspaper. And it's always been focused on the 4 pillars of customers, employees, suppliers, and community. So we have done a lot in that area. Inclusion is where we're really focusing our attention right now, and it's about diversity of thinking and enabling people to bring their whole selves to work, to be the authentic people they are. And that may mean, you're the horseback rider, or you're the artist, or, you're the sports person. You grew up in a non-English speaking household. You put yourself through college part-time. You graduated Ivy League, all of that, and bringing that to the table. and then I would add to that, I love this saying that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance.
I love that. Thank you.
So,
Thank
you know, really bringing people into the conversation, inviting those people to the table.
Okay.
I like that as well. So again, I don't represent a company, but I do work with all of the providers that service Massachusetts. I think that they're all doing a very good job in terms of diversity, in their workforce and trying to service their customers, our constituents. But we can always do better. So I think it's really important. You know, in Massachusetts, unfortunately, there are segments of the state that certain individuals gravitate to. So, you know, in one part of the state, there may be a large Portuguese community. Another part of the state, there might be a large Russian population. Another part of the state, more Haitian Creole. I think it's really important for companies. I know at the department we try to do this in terms of when we're going out to various communities in Massachusetts to take pamphlets catered to, in languages catered to those communities. I think it's important for companies to try to understand where they're serving and who's there. Maybe they can hire more service technicians to service those communities so that those service technicians that are going into the homes, they can actually communicate with their customers. A lot of their customers in those communities, it may be a single language household, and that language may not be English, right? So again, those are just some pointers where I think companies are doing well, but there's always room for growth.
So, I mean, you make a good point. So our customer base is becoming more diverse by the day.
By the day.
Wherever we are in the country, even in New England. And so given that, and Deb, you were talking about this kind of diversity of perspectives within the organization, trying to create an inclusive environment. Why is it important for us to have this inclusive environment within the workforce, given that we have this diversifying customer base? Why, or is there a link between those two things?
Oh, I think there's definitely a link because as you're developing products and services for your customers, you want people who think like them. And that's especially true for anyone who's developing and working with the customer. And it's not just that home technician or that customer service rep agent on the phone or the retail person. It really is. It's really everybody who's attached to anything to do with the customer.
Well, you know, one of the things that's been interesting. In my role when I was at Cates, I had a chance to look at kind of what was going on across the country. And as I've watched the industry change, grow, develop, things have to move much more quickly than they did a decade ago. We used to be kind of a lot more staid. Change would happen slowly over time. I mean, we got so many different folks developing content, so many different ways of delivering, so many different demands from different populations. I'm wondering, how does diversity affect our response to this changing environment? Does it help us? Does it hinder us? Are there things that we can do differently to take advantage of that?
So I think having a diverse workforce can only advance or support that. Because when you have a diverse workforce and new technologies are being developed and new initiatives, that diverse workforce is keeping that in mind as they're adding to the production of whatever the new product is. So it's really important, I think, because a lot of times individuals, customers, they will receive the new product and really are sort of stumped, right? But you want them to be able to receive it and be able to, for it to be intuitive, for them to be able to use it and feel comfortable with it. So I think having a diverse workforce initially, you know, in the workplace is so key, is so important to ensure that that happens.
And also to drive innovation and creativity. You know, the studies abound saying that the more diverse your workforce is, the more and inclusive, the more creative, the less risk that the company bears, and the more financially profitable. So,
Well, and I think that's one of the things, I think that's support that we really do have to drive home. Because when you think about it, at the end of the day, if we need to be more creative, if we need to be more flexible, if we need to be more productive, one of the things that's interesting I think about diversity is if you have an inclusive environment, then you are actually able to take advantage of all the raw material that's brought into a room from the various team members who are there. If you don't have an inclusive environment, if you're not managing that diversity effectively, then oftentimes what happens is different people and different ideas get excluded. And you know, I've gone through, I mean, I've seen lots of stuff, not just in our industry, but across industries where people missed great opportunities or did things that were ill-informed, and only when the marketplace responded back quite forcefully that people missed their mark, that then people had to respond. One of the things I think that's interesting is that within each of our companies, we have these focus groups. I mean, we actually do, if we're representative, we actually know what's going on out in the real world because they've got people who represent these different groups. So how do we take advantage of that? And I don't know, but I mean, I'm hoping that we can explore that just a little bit because as you, Deb, in particular, you've got to work with this in Cox. I mean, there's got to be new products and whatnot. And are there been things that you've done right that, hey, we took advantage of this because we had diverse employees who helped us avoid some problem or were responsive? How do we determine whether we got it right?
Well, you know, I think we do our best. We can always do better, but we do work really hard to bring in diverse workforce. It's a little bit of like whack-a-mole. There is so much going on and so many things. You all know that. I'll know this. You know, going after people's attention, but having good communication from the frontline employee to the people who design those products.
Right.
This year, the company has created a COE for creating adaptable equipment. So that's a really cool thing. And having salespeople and marketing people connected, so they are in constant communication. In Cox, we have a process, but it's not quite as tight for those people who are in customers' homes to get that information as quickly as we can up to the people who need it. And then we use the concept, and I'm sure we're not the only ones, of friendlies. So using your existing workforce to trial products. If you don't have a diverse workforce, then you're not getting the best data.
Okay.
So focus groups are key. They're really important, and you know, as a regulator, I would absolutely encourage that they continue grow those focus groups because our demographics are changing every day. Technology is changing, and we just sort of need to keep up with what's coming next and who is out there receiving it. So I think it's so hugely important.
As a regulator, you hear from our customers probably quite often.
Every day.
Do you all collect data which looks at the responses you get from our customers and how that demographically may be different so that maybe you hear from different neighborhoods or different ethnic groups or racial groups or whatnot about our products or services? And is that a resource that we might be able to tap into to get additional information about how we are meeting our customers' goals?
No, so that's a very good question. Unfortunately, we don't collect the data that way.
Okay.
So it's not sorted by neighborhood, by age group, by race, or any of those demographics. We just receive the information with my staff. They work with consumers, but we don't collect the data. I mean, I'm sure it's somewhere in the cloud, but it's not sorted in any way that would be tangible to any of the providers.
Because one of the things that, I mean, when I do a lot of diversity work, at the end of the day, we make this argument that metrics motivate. And one of the challenges oftentimes in the diversity workplace is that oftentimes our companies don't have real metrics for measuring diversity. It's oftentimes is the one business issue that we don't put metrics around. That people, you know, no one would ever tell the salespeople or the distribution folks, hey, go out and do your best job, and whatever you come back with, we're going to be happy with. I mean, I'm sure every one of you all probably have some specific goals and objectives, and if you don't meet those goals and objectives, somebody somewhere tells you very nicely or not so nicely, you need to step up. I'm trying to figure out if we're looking at diversity and inclusion, how do we determine what are good metrics, whether it be from our customers internally or whatever, so we can know whether we're doing a good job or how we can do better?
Externally?
Externally, internally, wherever we get those metrics.
I think it's a whole lot easier internally because we measure that way. We ask people to self-identify. We ask them if they're veterans, if they're disabled. They don't have to answer us, of course, but we do a better job at that. We assign goals based on that. You know, every leader has to mentor someone who is different than them, and that doesn't mean a different race. It can just be, I grew up in Kansas and you grew up in Alaska. So it's a whole lot easier, I think, on the inside. And I think part of the reason we started measuring that is because of the governmental requirement. I think even long before we realized, wow, this is really good for our business. So the way we measure, I'll put that in, in my mind, it's almost like silos. On the internal employee side, we don't measure that way for our customers. Our customers I see them cutting across. So if we're measuring on who are the customers who are buying one product or not buying the bundle from us, they might cut across. They might be elderly, they might be young and out of school, they might be, it might be a socioeconomic thing. So we're trying to hit all of that in the products and services we provide, but we're not measuring it that way.
Well, I mean, a lot of times when we think about diversity, we focus a lot on race, gender, LGBTQ. I mean, but you've mentioned a little bit about age. I want to spend just a little bit of time thinking about the age component of diversity, because right now those of us who are in that baby boomer generation, we watch that great generation slowly but surely, going into retirement, and they will stop being the biggest demographic and they're going to be replaced by the millennials. And millennials in the workplace, in the consumption of our products and services, et cetera, do things completely differently. How then do we build that part of the diversity equation into our products, our organizations, et cetera? And that was not anything that anyone was prepared for. I just kind of threw that curveball out there, so I'm just warning you.
Want me to take it? Okay. I think the first important point about that younger generation is the only time they notice diversity is when it's not there. So that's really important from a recruiting perspective and a retention perspective, because if you hire a diverse person in the community that you've provided for them doesn't meet their needs, they're not going to stay. And then I think the other issue is, how do you manage those people? They want to be managed differently. They want to work differently. They want to have company information on their device. They want to work maybe a little bit late morning, a little bit in the afternoon, and maybe from 10 to 12 at night. So that doesn't always work, because our customers might not want us in their home at 11 o'clock at night. And then in New England in particular, we have the oldest workforce in the Cox footprint. So by and large, our leaders are the older leaders. The newest employees are the youngest employees, and so our challenge is, how do we backfill for this workforce that's leaving and making sure that they have the skills to manage both generations.
So what we see at the department is a real split between the age groups. So your older population, they are very video centric. So they're home more, and they want to watch the news. They want to watch maybe soap operas that are still on. They want to watch, they have their programs that they have been watching for the last 25, 35 years. But then you have the younger generation where they're not watching video, like standard on the box. They're watching it on their phone or any devices that they may have. So that's, in terms of age, like that's what we're seeing when calls or concerns or questions come into the department. We see a real shift that way in terms of focus, in terms of the older population asking questions or having concerns regarding cable service, video service, and younger population asking questions in terms of broadband, more bundled packages, and having questions for those issues.
And from the customer perspective, that is there's a lot of work that we do because we're trying to meet the needs of so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's in creating bundles that serve other certain demographics. So a new product is straight up internet, and that's geared toward the person coming out of college who says, I don't really need TV because I watch it on my phone or I watch it on my iPad. But I do need internet, and I don't want a 2-year commitment with you. I just want to pay as I go. So a product for them. But you may have the family that says, I want the whole kit and caboodle. And then I was talking to someone yesterday who is in the audience actually, who was telling me from a technician standpoint, the skills that are required for that. They may walk into a home that's highly networked, and so that's not just the cable skills. That's home networking. Or we may have customers who say, I've got it. You don't need to come to my house to install. Just send me what I need. And then, of course, there's the risk of the person who says, send me what I need, and then they can't get it to work. And then we're spending money sending employees to their homes. But
Well, how do you create organizations which are flexible enough to respond to that? That's not our history. At least I wasn't in the industry that long. But what I was told about what our history was like, it wasn't that flexible. How do you create an organization that is that flexible today?
It's not easy. It's a challenge, and as a regulator, I see that and understand that. So when those questions come into the department, we're trying to be patient and understanding and meet the customer where they are. And I can only imagine that's what industry's doing as well. And they're trying to put their best technicians or a customer service rep out there to sort of address those unique questions that may be coming in every single day, because it's hard. Everyone's coming from a different place, and it's important, again, why to have a diverse workforce, to be prepared for all of those different questions and concerns that will come in.
And I think we've seen, at least I can speak for Cox, changes over the past several years in building much more capability in our corporate environment to create. And because I'm going to have a metaphor for this too, because I guess that's it for me this morning. But so we build a lot of stuff. We've got a lot of things going. And if anyone's old enough to remember the Lucille Ball video where they work in the chocolate shop and the chocolate is coming down on the belt and they can't package it, so they just try to eat it to make it. That's what it feels like to me. And our technicians are getting bombarded with stuff that we're trying to teach them. Our agents on the phone, it's the same thing, because we now have this capability of building a lot of stuff to try to address this changing and needs in the marketplace, and it's changing so rapidly. But it's tough, and it's tough on our employees also. We're asking them to do a lot.
So I would like to say one thing or add one thing to that. So in Massachusetts, I know that the providers do a very good job when new products are about to be rolled out. They work with the department to make sure that we are aware of these new initiatives and new products, so that we are, because we're on the front line as well, we can address any needs and concerns to help their customer base sort of deal with that. So I think it's really important for the diversity in terms of my office, the companies, for all of us to be aware of what's out there.
Oh, wow, okay, I didn't know anything about that. Well, I could keep on asking questions, but I'd like to open up to the audience. I think they're going to have a mic, so please wait for the mic. Or you can just shout really loudly.
All right.
It's coming.
Okay, here we go.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me okay? Rob Holly with Cox. Very quick question for you. You know, the FCC is doing a lot around supplier diversity. NARUP now has a panel on supplier diversity. And I'm kind of curious from either one of your perspectives on either what, you know, we can do in industry to do more with supplier diversity, and or are these organizations, NARUP and the FCC, making any material progress in getting minority-owned companies in having a seat at the table in terms of our business and the work that they do for us?
Debbie, do you want to take?
Sure. So suppliers has been a pillar, one of our 4 pillars since the beginning of our company. And so we're constantly raising the bar. And I can't even remember the millions, but it was, you know, the numbers are staggering. And they just raise the bar every year. And our president and the president of all the divisions of Cox Enterprises have to report their progress and successes every year. They have goals that they have to provide to the board of directors of the company. And supplier, you know, increasing supplier diversity is one of them. So.
Supplier diversity is one of those things our industry has done, especially our largest operators have done well in, generally speaking. And I think part of that is, again, the point I was making about metrics. I mean, that's one of the things that's real easy to measure. People can go and they can say, okay, well, we know who are defined as women-owned organizations or minority-owned organizations, and we can look and see exactly what that spend is. We can set targets. We can hold people accountable down the line. So most of our major companies have great databases for that. And because the FCC and other regulatory bodies pay attention to that, that's been one of the things that we do a pretty good job with. Some of our smaller operators, again, because they require certain systems that need to be set up and whatnot, still have some challenges. That doesn't mean that we can't do more. But I think one of the things that our most progressive companies do is they look at tier 2 and tier 3 supplier diversity kinds of initiatives, because one of the things is our companies are so big that, you know, at the end of the day, there may not be a minority supplier that can provide all the fiber optics that we need in order to be able to do something. But you may tell your first tier supplier, look, you got to go out and get a certain amount of diverse spend before. And here's the thing that's interesting about it. Even if you don't have a hard and fast goal, if you just ask the question, if you just say you're paying attention to it, that motivates folks, because they say somewhere inside may actually be looking at it, so I need to go be better just in case.
Right.
And so even if you're not as sophisticated, just pretend like you are, and you'll get more supplier diversity, just FYI. Another question. So everyone in this audience has got diversity unlocked. Y'all know how to do it. You all manage your organizations very well. You all participate very actively in your diverse groups and teams. You've never had any problems or issues. Wow, I have never seen this before. Either that or people are just being bashful, or we're just extremely good at what we do and we've just addressed all the questions.
I'm going to take that. We're extremely good.
Okay. Well, let me ask you all a question, because I'm going to ask the audience this question. When was the last time that any of you, and I will call up someone, faced a diversity issue in your organization that you think your company handled really well? Something public, not anything that, you know. Now, wait a minute. So there's been no, okay, let's see. I know we have Comcast out here. I know we have Cox out here, and there's been no diversity things. What programmers do we have out there? Because we've talked a lot about the operators. We haven't heard.
Yeah.
What programmers are Viacom is here? Okay. Viacom wrote the book on diversity and content, right?
I like to think so.
So when you all think about that, and again, I told you I like cold calling folks. How do you build diversity of content into your DNA? I mean, people would argue that Viacom has done that quite successfully. How do you all do that?
I think one thing that Viacom does.
Here's the mic.
Oh. I think. Is it on? Can you hear me? I think one thing that Viacom does really well is connect with our audience. We have a much younger audience. We focus on millennials and that younger demographic. And what we do really well is making sure that that is reflected in our content. So Trevor Noah on The Daily Show really connects with a younger, multicultural audience on Comedy Central. Abby and Alana on Comedy Central as well. All of our brands have very diverse talent, which I think does the job for us.
Anyone else who's out there? Do you have any other programmers who are out there represented? Okay, I was getting ready to say, JB, you're easy.
Well, the interesting thing for us at Revolt, we sort of have almost 70% African American, Asian, Latin, and then 30% Caucasian. So, but then they also are probably 70 to 80% under the age of 27. So we have challenges on just, we think differently. We want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of this very young employee base too, and making sure that we give them the platform to be able to communicate their ideas and thoughts. And our chairman, Diddy, is always telling us, get out of the way of the young people, let them run it, you kind of manage it. And those are probably some of our challenges. We've done groups where we've had a millennial council, I guess is what we called it. But challenges there on how they elevate their thoughts and ideas and literally get them past some of us more mature, execs that have our own ideas and thoughts. And so we're trying to figure that out. So it is a tough balance to find that if you guys have some thoughts and ideas to share, that can help.
You all have any thoughts or ideas?
So I was just going to say, so I love the fact that your chairman has said, let them do their thing, the younger workforce at the company. Because I think that's different. That's a different approach to how it's done today. And that in and of itself is diversity, right? So it's really exciting as a regulator to hear that among whether it's programmers or cable providers, like there's a diversity of thought, because again, that's reflecting the constituents, right? So who you're trying to serve, and that can only make my job easier and better. But again, that's really exciting. I would say to continue that. I also think it's very, I think so the breakdown of your workforce is very unique. And I like hearing that. I'd love to hear more in terms of what that's like, going out in the larger universe, and all of the pros and cons with all of that. So that's really exciting.
And I would say that, to me, is an example of you've got the diverse people, and you've invited them to dance, right? So you're giving them that latitude to go out and build, and empowering them, and you'll get the best that their creative, unique minds have to offer. But it's a level of empowerment that may not be culturally the norm, and so it's a learning.
And the thing I would add is that while every idea is not a brilliant idea, I would argue probably almost every idea has some kernel of truth within it. Right. And if you develop an organizational culture where someone can come in and say, yes, I think this is a brilliant idea, and of course as someone who might be a little bit more mature, you're like, look, we've been there, done that 100 times in the last century, that's just not gonna work. Instead you say, well, wait a minute, why don't we pretend for a minute that there is some truth there? there is some good idea there, and we collectively work to figure out what that is, that's where creativity comes from. And here's the thing that's interesting about it. Even for us more mature folks, we like it when people pretend like our ideas still may be relevant. And one of the things is when you create a culture that does that, you get the millennials will say, well, wait a minute, so there's something that that person who is old enough to be my father or even older can say, well, wait a minute, there may be a little bit of truth there. There's a little bit of truth around what it is that I understand, and then we come up with something. Because here's what our real problem is everyone wants to have the illusion that we have a solution that was customized to me. We all live in this I world. Now then, we know from a business perspective, you can't do that. But you want to present the illusion that's all about the individual. And how you do that is you come up with some collectively creative ideas, taking into account these differences in perspectives. And the thing is, if you create that environment, then our older folks and our younger folks and our black folks and our women and our LGBTQ all feel like they're a part of it. And so I think that's part of what the managerial challenge is. But we as leaders have to role model that. And so when people aren't, when people immediately shut someone down saying, oh, we can't do that, we don't have the time for discussion, say, no, yeah, we do have the time for that discussion.
I think that's the key, is getting leaders to make that happen. Because especially if you're changing a culture, you may have people with ideas who are too shy to offer them, even if they're already at the table. So a leader has to have the discipline to say, I might know the answer, I might think I know the answer, but maybe I don't know the answer and I'm used to just telling people what to do, and instead I'm going to stay silent and I'm going to call on those people who are not voicing their opinions because they have to have a thought. You didn't hire people who weren't, smart in thinking and good at what they do. So that is that's part of the learning and evolution for getting to an inclusive environment.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, I'm Kristen Roberts from Comcast. So a couple years ago, we had a diversity and inclusion council at the division level, and it really didn't filter down to the regions. So we're launching our own diversity and inclusion council for our region and across all the other regions, especially in the Northeast Division. But the people that nominated themselves for the council are frontline employees. So we have 12 frontline employees in our Western New England region who are technicians and call center agents, and there's a couple managers, a couple supervisors, but they're going to be the voice of our Diversity and Inclusion Council. So we have a strong focus on whether it's supplier diversity, our community impact. So any thoughts about what we could do to make sure that we're hearing our frontline employees' voices as they come up with policies and procedures and communications to make sure that our whole entire region is embracing diversity and inclusion?
Sure. I think that's great. That's fantastic and very smart. One of the things that I would suggest is that because folks are coming from different segments of the company, just initially just making them all feel welcome and comfortable in the space that you're providing for them so that they can speak freely. Because they are not going to know each other probably, but you want to sort of develop an environment where they feel that they can sort of express their thoughts. So just making it comfortable, and that could be having food there, or just having it in a light, airy space, but just someplace, and starting out in some sort of icebreaker. Or my staff will tell you that we don't have a meeting at the department without me cracking a joke. Like I really want to get feedback from them, so I absolutely try to make them feel comfortable at every meeting. So just making a space that's warm and welcoming, I think.
I guess I'll offer, at Cox we have employee resource groups, so those are affinity groups. We have 4 or 5 at this point. So there's one for women, Hispanic, African American, we have a pride group, but we make a distinction. Our employee resource groups are about community and building a network and growing that inclusion feeling. The diversity councils are more tied to the business because of who signs up for ours, depending on the location, because we're allowed to have our own in each region. They may be more community focused, or they may do more things locally that are impacting employees and how they feel. I think it's important to have senior level sponsorship for those diversity councils because it speaks volumes to the importance of it. It also gives them the guidance they may need, and also helps them break down barriers that may exist so that they can accomplish some of the things they want to actually accomplish. Because if they come up with a great idea and then they don't know how to make it happen, that could be frustrating. And then I know in some other regions of the company, there's sort of edicts, like if you are at this level, you will be on the diversity council. All directors will be on the diversity council. I don't know if they're more effective or not. They probably have a different output, but just a couple of thoughts.
And the thing I would add, just building on Deb's point, is that you want to make sure that the ideas that they come out with actually get a fair vetting. My guess is the reason why you got folks at that level coming up and it's because they don't think they've been heard. So the worst thing that can happen is you create a council around these issues, they put their hard work into it, and then the company doesn't show real visible ways in which they're heard. Doesn't mean you're going to implement everything that they say, because no one gets any other stuff implemented. Well, no one at that level gets all their stuff implemented. But you've got to find a way to show that the organization really is listening. And if you do that, that's extremely valuable.
I have a question for the audience. I'm curious how many of you work at companies that have employee surveys. And do your employee surveys ask questions about diversity? Yeah, okay.
Last year at this panel, I made a comment that white guys are diverse too, which they are, because everyone has diversity of perspectives, and it's important to get those perspectives engaged in the conversation as you get every other. Now then, I haven't heard anything from any of the white guys in the audience, so I'm gonna have to cold call somebody, or.
You heard from.
Oh, that's right. Okay, the first guy. Sorry about that. So I want to hear from another one. Okay.
Okay, the bald white guy. How's that?
Okay.
This is Chuck Stoffer. I'm also with Cox Communications, so I have responsibility for the field operations. So just a comment as I listen to the ladies on the panel. I think we do a good job at Cox from a diversity, particularly, and I will speak for my organization, across the organization, and the employee survey was going to be one of the comments. We lean in heavily on that. But interestingly enough, and maybe from you, Karen, is when I think of how that transcends into our customer base and how important that is, as I read a lot of the comments and surveys back from our customers, they're more on the opposite side, right? So we send somebody to their home that they didn't relate to from a diversity and inclusion, as opposed to we want that. So I'd be interested in your feedback on that and what you hear from both sides of it, because most of it, unfortunately, is on the opposite side that I get to see or hear.
Right, so that sort of relates back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of really knowing your customer base and the region that you're serving, and trying to incorporate service technicians and alike to service those areas so that they are getting served by individuals that they feel comfortable with or can relate to or have a communication with. The other thing that I didn't mention, and I would like to mention, is I think it's really important in terms of the bills that are being mailed to a customer's home. Like, I think that there should be a choice. So a customer should be given the choice: do I want my bill completely in Russian? Do I want my bill in Cantonese or Mandarin? I mean, in the department, those are some of the languages, excuse me, that we're seeing more and more every day. You know, Spanish, right, is the second, is the default language in America. Totally fine. But there are other languages coming up right behind Spanish. And, you know, maybe that should be an option so that customers can feel more comfortable, understand their bill, understand important service notices that are being mailed to their home, because oftentimes it's either in English or it's in Spanish, and it's not in another language, and that household may be serving another language. So those, I think, hopefully that's answering your question in terms of providing technicians for certain regions that there's a predominant group there that they can relate to, and also the service notices and bills are really key as well.
Well, I've been given the 2-minute warning, so I just wanted to give you all a chance to make some final comments, some thoughts, some words that we should take away if we don't remember anything else from this discussion today.
Kind of long on thought. I'm going to steal one from my boss who's sitting in the audience.
That's always a good move.
Leadership matters, and in this particular area, both diversity and inclusion, leadership, what they think, their attitude, how they act, it sets the tone for what you expect out of the organization.
So I guess the one thing I would like to say, and I don't think that there are any providers or content providers in the room that are doing this, but always remember that if you think that your company is diverse, you can always do more. So don't stop at where you are. Continue to grow diversity and inclusion techniques, methods, and thoughts in your company, because it's so important. And as we mentioned this morning, this issue is growing. It's so important to us, to everyone in the room, and it's changing every day.
And I guess the thing that I would add is that, you know, as we are in an industry which is going through even more upheaval and more change, if that's even possible, and I'm sure that it is, we're facing a lot more competition. Stuff is going to get crazier before it gets more stable again. And I think that the organizations which effectively recruit and develop an inclusive workforce, that will be the secret sauce which will lead to success. Those who don't will end up being also-rans. That's just my 2 cents for what's worse. So what I would like to do, though, is let's thank our panelists. This has been great.
Thank you.
And I want to also thank those people out there who I cold called for participating as well. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.